Hey friends, welcome back to my house. It's another day and ready for now today 2 chapters of the miraculous journey of Edward Tulane. We're winding down. After today, we only have 2 more chapters to go before the ending of this great book, my favorite book to read to you guys all year. My only regret is that I couldn't sit with you all around me on the carpet to read it to you like I usually would, because I love getting into discussions with you guys and when I read this, and my friends when I read this book, period. So anyway, when we last left off, we find that Edward has been woken up out of oblivion, which means kind of like unaware of anything. He had been in kind of a dreamy land. We were trying to decide if maybe it was insinuating that he was passing away, or he had passed away, or maybe he was in a dreamland, or we weren't sure, because he is a toy and this is a fiction story. So we can kind of use our own imaginations and come to conclusions on that. But we find that he's woken up by Lucius Clark, which is a master doll craftsman. And he has put Edward's head back together and said that when Neil slammed him on the diner counter, he had broken his head into 21 pieces, if you remember. Which is like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that he was able to put him back together, because that would have been horrible. So no wonder poor Edward was in oblivion. Now, he does realize too that Bryce had to let him go when in order for Lucius to repair Edward, because with a fine craftsman means lots of money for repairs. And even though the work would be done well, Bryce doesn't have money for that, as we know. So Bryce made the ultimate sacrifice and gave up the rabbit that he loved so much in order for him to be made whole again. This is really, really a huge lesson for us. The themes that are popping out of this book all over of sacrifice for those you love, and different learning to not take love for granted. We're hearing that through the whole thing, and learning to love and unconditional love for other people is just astounding in this book. I hope you guys have been enjoying it as much as I love it. So, when we last left off, then previously on, as I've already been telling, but I forgot to say that, we hear that Edward has entered doll time. So, our 2 questions as we dive into chapter 24 and 25, this has gone really fast, are why there's going to come a statement in here where Edward talks about that he is alone and he feels alone. So why do you think Edward feels alone even though he's in a room full of dolls? Because remember, this is a doll shop. And Edward he's a toy, so he can communicate with them. Fiction story. So why would Edward feel alone in a room full of other toys that he could communicate with? And do you think that Edward cares that he has fine clothes on again? Because Lucius Clark, as you know, told him he was going to make him fine clothes, the finest silk clothing. So Edward was going to be restored to his original glory, if you will. So let's find out. Grab your papers and pencils. Get ready to jot your thoughts while I read today's wonderful 2 chapters. You're going to we're going down the hill now. We reached our climax when Edward got his head broken. I don't know if you guys were thinking about that, but the yodeler got to the top of the mountain, and now we're beginning to come down that mountain of our story to where we're going to come into the resolutions, and the story is going to wrap up. The thread is unraveling. Remember, we talked about that in class? So here we go. Chapter 24. Here's a picture. Who do you think it is? That's right, it's Bryce. Looks like he's coming into the store. Let's dive in. And so Edward Tulane was mended, put together again, cleaned and polished, dressed in an elegant suit, and placed on a high shelf for display. From the shelf, Edward could see the whole shop, Lucius Clark's workshop, and the windows to the outside world, and the door that the customers used to enter and leave. From the shelf, Edward saw Bryce open the door one day and stand in the threshold, the silver harmonica in his left hand flashing brilliantly, in the sunlight flooding in through the windows. "Young sir," said Lucius, "I'm afraid that we made a deal." Can't I see him?" asked Bryce. He wiped his hand across his nose and that gesture filled Edward with a terrible feeling of love and loss. "I just want to look at him." Did you notice that it just said that Edward, just by watching Bryce do that it filled him with a feeling of love and loss? Sometimes when there are people that we care about, even when they do little quirky things, like constantly wiping their nose or fidgeting with their hair or something like that, people we care about, when we don't have them around us anymore, we even miss those little things. And that's a very human trait that has been given to Edward. And it's showing us, the author is showing us that he really does love Bryce for him to miss something so small as a gesture of him wiping his nose all the time. Lucius Clark sighed. "You may look," he said. "You may look, and then you must go and not come back. I cannot have you in my shop every day mooning over what you have lost." "Well, yes, sir," said Bryce. Lucius sighed again. He got up from his workbench and went to Edward's shelf and picked him up and held him so that Bryce could see him. "Hey, Jangles," said Bryce, "you look good. The last time I seen you, you looked terrible. Your head was busted in and—" "He's put together again," said Lucius, "as I promised you he would be." Bryce nodded and wiped his hand across his nose. Bless Bryce's heart. He's experienced a lot of pain in his little life. And Edward has experienced some of that pain with him, so they have a strong connection. It must have been extremely hard for Bryce to give Edward up and to know he's sitting there in that shop and he can't take him with him. "Can I hold him?" he asked. "No," said Lucius. Bryce nodded again. He's a respectful boy, isn't he? "Tell him goodbye," said Lucius Clark. "He is repaired. He has been saved. Now you must tell him goodbye." "Goodbye," said Bryce. "Don't go," thought Edward. "I won't be able to bear it if you go." "And now you must leave," said Lucius Clark. "Yes, sir," said Bryce, but he stood without moving, looking at Edward. "Go," said Lucius Clark. "Go." "Please," thought Edward, "don't." Bryce turned. He walked through the door of the doll mender's shop. The door closed. The bell tinkled. And Edward was alone. There's where our question comes in. That was the end of chapter 24. Why do you think Edward feels alone even though he's in a room full of other dolls and toys? Moving on to 25. Remember, be thinking about as you listen, does he care that he's all mended and in fine clothing, restored to his original beauty again? Technically, of course, he was not alone. Lucius Clark's shop was filled with dolls, lady dolls and baby dolls, dolls with eyes that opened and closed and dolls with painted on eyes, dolls dressed as queens and dolls wearing sailor suits. Edward had never cared for dolls. He found them annoying and self-centered, twittery and vain. This opinion was immediately reinforced by his first shelf mate, a china doll with green glass eyes and red lips and dark brown hair. She was wearing a green satin dress that fell to her knees. "What are you?" she said in a high-pitched voice when Edward was placed on the shelf next to her. "I am a rabbit," said Edward. Do you notice that now it says "said Edward" instead of "thought Edward"? That is pivotal. This tells you that now Edward is no longer communicating through his thoughts, because when he is with humans and animals in real life, or fictional real life, we could only hear his thoughts because he's a toy. But now he's with other toys. The author is using dialogue quotations, and she's saying things like "said Edward," showing you that now he's gone into actually communicating as humans were, again giving it that personification trait to show how the toys can hear each other, even though the humans and the animals could not hear him. "I am a rabbit," said Edward. The doll let out a small squeak. You're in the wrong place, she said. This is a shop for dolls, not rabbits. Edward said nothing. Shoo, said the doll. I would love to shoo, said Edward, but it is obvious that I cannot. After a long silence, the doll said, I hope you don't think that anyone is going to buy you. Again, Edward said nothing. The people who come in here want dolls, not rabbits. They want baby dolls or elegant dolls, such as myself. Dolls with pretty dresses, dolls with eyes that open and close. I have no interest in being purchased, said Edward. I wonder why he has no interest in being purchased. The doll gasped. Oh, you don't want somebody to buy you, she said. You don't want to be owned by a little girl who loves you? Sarah Ruth, Abilene. Their names went through Edward's head like notes of a sad, sweet song. I've already been loved, said Edward. I have been loved by a girl named Abilene. I have been loved by a fisherman and his wife and a hobo and his dog. I've been loved by a boy who played the harmonica and by a girl who died. Don't talk to me about love, he said. I have known love. This impassioned speech shut up Edward's shelfmate for a considerable amount of time. Well, she said at last. Still, my point is that no one is going to buy you. They did not speak to each other again. The doll was sold 2 weeks later to a grandmother who was purchasing her for a grandchild. Yes, she said to Lucius Clark. That one right there, the one with the green dress, she is quite lovely. Yes, said Lucius. She is, isn't she? And he plucked the doll from the shelf. Goodbye and good riddance, thought Edward. The spot next to the rabbit stayed vacant for some time. Day after day, the door to the shop opened and closed, letting in early morning sun or late afternoon light, lifting the hearts of the dolls inside, all of them thinking when the door swung wide that this time, the person entering the shop would be the one who wanted them. Edward was the lone contrarian. He prided himself on not hoping, on not allowing his heart to lift inside of him. He prided himself on keeping his heart silent, immobile, closed tight. I'm done with hope, thought Edward. And then one day at dusk, right before he closed the shop, Lucius Clark placed another doll on the shelf next to Edward. That's the end of chapter 25. Now I want to talk about one thing real quick, and then we're going to go. You notice how it said that he has come to the point now where he does not want to be loved again. Sometimes when people have experienced great pain and they're grieving, they go through a period where they feel like they can never love anyone again, or they feel like that they don't want to open up their heart to experience pain again. That's very human to feel that way. But people can overcome that. And it's normal to go through that and to feel that pain. And as you go on each day, new hope can come in. Different things in life can bring new hope in. I wonder if Edward is going to find something that's going to bring hope back to his life. We'll find out tomorrow on chapter 26 of The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Love you guys. Don't forget to answer my questions. Bye.